That was Claire Hoffman, the book Greetings from Utopia Park, Surviving a Transcendent Childhood. I thought she was really honest and struggling to come to terms with her experience, and obviously affected by some of the praise and criticism she's received from the book. It was very personal for her.
No doubt. I don't know how much she was affected by it. I'm sure as a seasoned journalist, she's had experiences like that in the past, but it's not surprising that she would get criticism from people who are close to the organization she writes about,
Hmm.
on both ends of the spectrum. So I
Right.
think she wrote a fair and honest book.
I do too, and
Obviously,
I
it's
think that
not going to satisfy everybody.
right, and it's especially hard because there are people that you care about and have friendships with or relationships with, and those relationships may be affected unfairly because people
Yeah,
we should all respect each other's opinion, good or bad, whatever it is, but that's not always the case. And yeah, it's bold, and there was a lot of self exploration, and she really talked about her family life and everything. So a lot of that stuff takes you out of your comfort zone, and I
it's
think she did a good
true.
job
And in
handling
her
it.
case, because it was a memoir and a critique of the community she grew up in, it's more complicated than someone who, say, writes an autobiographical novel like I once did, or writes a sort of objective book without the personal element, and critiques things
Right.
like that, like
Right.
I did with American Veda. She's got it on both ends.
Yeah. In American Vader, Phil, you obviously talk to people from a lot of different organizations, different movements, different followers of different spiritual leaders. How much commonality is there from group to group, is your experience? In
Well,
your experience?
yeah, from what I've told, and the process continues. The book's been out
Hmm.
5 6 years, but I keep meeting people and having these conversations. So, I always joke when people tell me about uh, their own organizations that they all think theirs is the only one
Right.
that's dysfunctional in this way or that way, or has an orthodoxy that makes life difficult for people who are more liberal or progressive or open-minded. And they all have some of those characteristics, and they all have people who are extremely committed and very protective of their teachings and their gurus and their organizations, and don't like the presence of doubt or criticism, and other people in those movements who are much, more open-minded and liberal and friendly to outsiders and dissenters and so forth. There's always a range.
Right.
They're all run by human beings, so they're going to be imperfect or dysfunctional, each in its own way,
Right.
and they're different, just as uh, Catholicism and a Catholic church would be different from a Protestant church or a synagogue or a mosque, but they all have certain characteristics in common. And the critical thing, I think, is for followers to find their own place in it and get what's valuable and avoid the stuff they find unpleasant or difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting. I am very familiar with. I spent a lot of time in the community that Claire was referring to in Fairfield, Iowa, the Transcendental Meditation community there, which is really sort of part of a larger town community now, and there's less distinction between the people who are involved in meditation, the people that aren't involved in meditation, and so on and so forth. So, but when I also spend a part of the year out in California and often in Encinitas, which is in North County, San Diego, and it's the home of the Self-Realization Fellowship, and one of their focal points, you have the Paramahansa Yogananda, who you are writing a biography on now as we speak. But I found it interesting that when I listen to people talk there from that community in a coffee shop or whatever, First of all, it's just like the conversations I would hear in Fairfield, a lot of esoteric stuff and whatnot. And then
Hmm.
in Fairfield, amongst many of the meditators, you hear Maharishi said this, Maharishi said that, Maharishi said when you eat,
Right.
yogurt, blah, blah, blah. There it's Master said this, Master said that, Master
Right.
said when you eat such. So the similarities were striking, and it was really unbelievable. And I'm sure if you went to 10, 12, 20 different communities, it would be the same. As a matter of fact, I have friends that are part of the Lubavitch Hasidic community in Brooklyn, and very similar. The way
Yeah.
they refer to the Rebbe said this and the Rebbe said that, and
Yeah.
so those similarities are there. And like you said, if somebody's in that community or is part of those communities, you really have to navigate it. You can get a lot of good out of it, but you can
Yeah.
also get caught up in the orthodoxy, and you could get forced to believe things you really don't want to believe. So you have to exercise your intellect and make those decisions that you think appropriate, and take from it what's valuable and leave
Yeah.
behind what's not valuable. And for some people, they can't function in any community like that at all because their beliefs don't allow it.
Right. And some people can't function outside of it.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so, it's an individual thing. And I found the same thing you have. And I've talked to people from all these organizations, and some of it is a generational thing. So
Right.
I've spoken to a lot of baby boomers like us who got involved with different gurus and ashrams and movements in the 60s and 70s, whether it was Muktananda or Satchidananda or Yogananda or any of them. And, we're 30, 40 years older now, and we can joke about what it was like and our
Hmm.
experiences, and we learn from each other.
Right.
I'm curious, I found it very interesting to see what it was like in Claire's generation, the children of our
Right.
generation.
Right.
And I
It,
have a question for you, since you live in
yeah.
Fairfield now. When you read Claire's book, which focuses on a period when she was young, so it was 20, 30 years ago, whatever, how does the community there compare to what it's like now?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I don't spend the full year here now. I spend, at least a few months a year here, 4 or 5 months,
Hmm.
and it's very different. First of all, and I have had the experience of living in this community during that period she's talking about as well, in the 80s and 90s. And let's put it this way: if, like in American Judaism, you have the Orthodox, conservative, and Reformed,
Right.
which you have in every
Right.
spiritual group, every religion, I believe.
Yeah.
In Fairfield, maybe in the 80s and 90s, you had 50% were Orthodox and 20% were conservative and 30% were Reformed. Now it's maybe 10% are Orthodox, 20% are conservative, and 70% are Reformed. So I think people are less rigid about their beliefs. They're more accepting of um, of other people and their beliefs. And also,
Hmm.
as she pointed out, the TM movement is changing. There's less
Yeah.
emphasis on advanced programs and what they call the TM cities and that sort of stuff, and more emphasis just on the basic teaching. And because if they don't have that and they stick strictly to orthodoxy, then I think that it will be difficult for the organization to survive. And she points that out.
Well, and that's true of any religious movement. The more orthodox, the fewer people
Yeah,
in the larger
yeah,
population will
yeah.
be
But
attracted
but
to it, because
that's
the
yeah.
ortho.
You go ahead.
And but one of the things that I find interesting is, and is very important, I think, for people to be aware of, that Claire had her experiences. A lot of them were difficult and challenging, and she found problems in the community and the organization she grew up around. But here she is, a grown up with children, and she still finds the practice of TM, of meditation, of great value in her life. And that distinction between the methods, the transformative practices that the teachers brought, and the organizational trappings is one that's terribly important, and not everybody is capable of making those distinctions. And I found that true in all the other groups too, that many people pulled away from the organization. They just didn't like being in it. and being the community was too isolated or too exclusivist, and they didn't feel comfortable at a certain point in their lives. But the message, the practices they picked up, the point of view, the way of looking at the world, they held on to them. And some people can't make that distinction, and they throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. And she also mentioned, just the support you get in a community. Like, say somebody's in a very tight Mormon community. She mentioned that. Somebody's in an Amish community. Somebody's in a Hasidic community. And there are people that leave those communities, and it's very, very difficult because there's tremendous support. And it's a struggle for some people because, on the one hand, they want to stay in the community because they enjoy it and the people and all that, but they just don't share the same beliefs anymore. Now, some people can compromise and say, beliefs aren't so important to me, and I'll just go with the flow. I don't really believe this stuff anyway, but I love the community. Whereas other people, and I think like Claire, are very deep thinkers, and their beliefs have to match their lives. And I think that for people like that, it's a bit more of a struggle. And there are some
and they feel it very difficult to be in a situation where they can't be honest with what they're thinking and how they're feeling about things. And it's sort of like all the Catholics who practice birth control, but they still like to go to church.
Exactly. or all the people in 95% of Catholics in France don't go to church, but they still consider themselves Catholic, and they'll show up a couple of times a year. There was a book written and made it in a movie. It's a great book, a great movie, The Chosen, and it's about somebody that grows up in a Jewish community, very Orthodox, and then they don't break from it really. They just decide to live a more secular life, and not in that community anymore. But they take with them all those things that they felt good and honorable from that community, but they're going to be more secular.
I think you and I did that.
Yeah.
We were both deeply immersed in the TM community at one point, and then we sort of pulled away a little bit because it was more comfortable for our way of life, but we maintain, I'm extremely grateful. I couldn't be more grateful for what I acquired and learned in those years, but I'm more comfortable on the periphery of things and being more eclectic in my pursuits and talking to all the people we talk to on spirit matters.
Exactly, and that, but still hold meditation to be a great tool, and many great things learned, but not having to take the whole ball of wax and pick and choose what you like. I also mentioned to Claire in another conversation, not in the interview today, but that her book reminded me of James Hilton's book, Lost Horizons, where the fellow goes to Shangri-La, and then it's real, and then he doesn't think it's real, and then he leaves, and he thinks, was that real or not real? And I think she's going through some of that now, where she's thinking back to her childhood.
Found out a great compliment.
Yeah, there's certain things she misses. So anyway, another good one, and again, the book, Greetings from Utopia-Park, Surviving a Transcendent Childhood, Claire Hoffman, and her website, clairehoffman.com. It's all posted up at spiritmatterstalk.com, and you're listening to Spirit Matters with Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda, and Dennis Ramundi. That's me.
Yes, and when you hear this interview with Claire, no angry emails.
Yeah, please. We don't emails, yes. Feedback, yes. But be kind and gentle with us. We're delicate folks. All right, Phil. Till next time.
All right. Next time.